Hello everyone, welcome to this coloring tutorial of this beautiful swan. All of the supplies that I used for this project will be linked down below, so let's just go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I decided to add a moon into my picture. So I'm using my circle stencil here, and I'm going to use circle number 32, which is the one to the right of the number 32. And you see how it's got those two lines at the top and the bottom of the circle? Well, I'm going to use that to line it up with the guidelines here on my printout. So then I'm just going to pull it down a little bit to give it some space from the top. So you see how I've lined it up with those guidelines. And then once I'm happy that that's pretty much in the center, then I'm going to go ahead and draw it out. Now I'm ready to color my sky, and I'm going to use these Noyo gel crayons. And the colors that I'm going to use are this lavender color and the dark purple. So I'm going to start with the dark purple, and I've been using mine, so I'm going to clean off those crumbs there. And then I'm going to decide about how much of that dark purple I want in the sky. And then I'm going to lightly indicate where I want that dark purple to end. And I'm going to use that guideline there at the top to use as my guideline to section off my sky, because these gel crayons are great, but you want to catch the blending while they're still moist. So that's why I color in sections. So I'm going to get that section outlined, and then I'm going to color it in. Now notice that I'm keeping my strokes close together. That's going to help me cover up all of the paper that might show through. And it's a good thing that I outlined, because that acts as a barrier to make sure that I don't accidentally color where I don't want it to go. So I'm done with the dark purple for now. Now I'm going to switch to the lavender color, and I'm going to finish off this section of the sky using that as my guideline. And also notice that when I section it off within the sky, again, I do it very lightly because I don't want that line to show up right there in the middle of the sky. So anyway, with this lavender color, I'm circling it right into the bottom of the darker color because that's going to help me with my blending later. And then let's just get the rest of this section colored in. Now that we're done coloring, the next step is to blend, and I'm going to blend from light to dark. So you see I'm going in at first horizontally, and then I'm going to circle that lighter color into the darker color until it pretty much disappears into the darker color. And then just finishing up blending that darker purple. Okay, so now that you pretty much see what to do, I'm going to go ahead and speed up the video because it's the same thing but just on the other side. Now here I'm putting it back at normal speed because I want you to see I've been using this a lot, so I've got a lot of crumbs that I need to smooth off, and then I'm going to find an edge somewhere on that color. And that is what's going to help me get a clean outline around my shapes. Then here I made sure to clean off any of that dark purple that was still on my fingers before I go in and blend that lighter purple. And if you ever need to rework your lighter areas, make sure to clean off your fingers first. So now we're going to repeat the same steps in the water, except it's going to be opposite. So now I'm going to put the dark there at the bottom, sectioning it off right there, and I decided to go as high as the tip of the swan's tail. But now that you pretty much know the little routine here, now I'm going to speed it up. And right here, because I'm going to also put light purple, because it's the sky reflecting onto the water, I was afraid of losing my horizon line. So I went in with a number 2 pencil and marked it there off to the side of on the frame. And then outlined everything. And you'll see now in a minute, I also decided to leave a white gap between the 2 sections so I don't lose that horizon line. Now you'll see in a moment on the other side, I started with the lighter purple, but typically I actually like to start with the darker color, and that's just because if you start with the lighter color, the darker color could end up overpowering the lighter color. But you'll see how I resolve that in just a minute. So what I did so that dark purple didn't end up overpowering the lavender color is, you see how I just left a little bit of a gap there between the 2 colors, and then I went back with the lavender and circled on top of the darker purple. So I also sped up the next part because we're going to color the whole swan with white, and you can barely see it on camera, but you'll be able to see it in person. But you want to get the whole thing colored because we're going to add some shading, and we're going to need that white to blend the shading into. And we're going to use this lighter purple as the shading color, because that is going to make it look like it's being reflected. All that purple in the background is being reflected onto the white of the swan's body. So I just very lightly went along the back of the head and neck, underneath the wing, and then underneath each of those little feather parts of the wing, along the bottom of the body, and a little bit of the back of the tail, and also along the bottom of the head. You'll notice also that I left, again, a little white gap at the back of the head, and that was because I didn't want it to get so confused with the purple that's already there. And just very lightly blend that purple right into the white. And the goal is to make it look faded at the edges so that it doesn't look like any harsh outlines. And now here I decided to take the shading just a little step further, and I went back in with the darker purple right underneath the wing, just to emphasize that as a little bit more of a shadow. And you got to be real careful that you don't go into the actual wing. And when you blend it, you also want to make sure that your fingers don't go into the wing. Keep your fingers in the body of the swan and let it have a faded edge for that beautiful, realistic looking shadow. And once I established that shadow under the wing, then I could go back in with the lighter purple along the bottom portion of the wing, so that the wing has more shading on it, so that the wing can also look three-dimensional. Now here I felt like my fingers were just too fat and clunky to get into those little spaces. So I decided to get out my number 6 filbert brush, and I dipped it in the water, but noticed that I'm wiping a lot of the water off because I just need the bristles to be a little bit moist, not dripping wet because I'm just doing this on regular paper. It's not watercolor paper. And I used the brush to just more gracefully blend in all of those shadings into the white of the swan. Now this next part is kind of optional, but I decided to make the moon look a little bit more fancy, and I took my white and gave it a glow. And all you have to do is just go around and around and around that moon. And here you see I just was doing a little bit of touch-ups, but that just helps the moon to look a little bit more visually interesting in the sky. And here is where I decided to put a little bit of a reflection of the swan into the water. So notice that I'm following the same curve as the swan, and I'm also leaving a little bit of that purple showing through to make it look like, you know, the water is breaking up that reflection. And now with the black, I'm going to go in and add little blades of grass, like silhouettes of grass. And I decided to keep them kind of short to make them look like they're further off in the distance, and all in different directions because this is nature. They wouldn't be perfectly straight. And also be really careful around the head. Make sure you don't get that black into the white of her head. And by the way, what I'm doing here is notice that I'm starting from the bottom and I'm flicking my wrist up. That's going to help you get a tapered end of it instead of chunky looking grass. And then I decided to add little cattails kind of randomly in there in different directions. And then while I had the black, I decided to put some more blades of grass at each corner, but these are closer to us, so I made them much longer. I also tried to get them in towards the lighter part of the water so that you can kind of see them a little bit more. And then I also added some more cattails. And here I decided to put reflections into the water. And so basically what I did was just mirror the same blades of grass, but in the opposite direction. And I felt like my blades of grass looked a little grainy, so I decided to go back to my filbert brush and again dip it in the water, wipe most of the water off, and watch how I'm going to hold the brush. So you don't want it like that, you want it turned on its side like that, And you see how I'm holding it, my hand is at a vertical position, and I'm just, again, flicking up. I have more pressure towards the bottom of the blade, and then I release my pressure as I go up the blade, and that will help to get even more of a tapered edge. But using that little bit of water on the brush, that really helps to smooth out the graininess of those Noyo gel crayons. And then I did the same thing for the reflections as well. Okay, so I'm done with the brush, and now I'm going to use this Folk Art multi-surface paint, but you could use any white acrylic paint. I just happen to really like this particular paint because it's so opaque, meaning it's not translucent. And if you happened to get a little bit of a dirty mess in the moon, this is where you can use the paint to sort of clean it up. The other alternative is you could just use some of the smudged up purple as part of the moon texture, if you want to go in that direction. So for now, I'm done with the brush. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some stars in the sky. And I'm going to use this opened up paper clip, and I'm just going to use the very tip of it. I'm going to just load a little bit on the tip. And you can see it's just, you go straight down, and you can get 3 or 4 good dots out of it before you have to reload. And so now that you see what to do, I'm just going to go ahead and speed this up to save a little bit of video time. And then I decided to also sprinkle some reflections of the stars in the water. I think that just looks so ethereal. So this next step is kind of optional. You could stop here, but first I wanted to make sure that my the cattails, the reflections, were dry, because now I'm going to put more reflections in the water. So I'm going to start by emphasizing the water line. And again, remember how to hold the brush, just using the very side edge of it. And if you have been following along with my drawing tutorials, this will look very familiar. So notice that when I'm making these horizontal lines, that my wrist is not moving, my whole arm is actually making the motion. That is really going to help you out, because you've got to stay as parallel to the horizon line as possible. And it's a very, very light touch. Your bristles will barely touch the paper. That's very important. That's what helps you get those thin lines with the paint. Also notice too that the lines towards the back of the water are shorter, and now I'm getting wider and wider towards the front. That's another trick that you can use to express the distance. You can now see that the reflection is helping it to look like that a horizon of the water is much farther away now. And then here, with an even lighter touch, you want to make sure that you barely have paint on your brush. I added just a few more light strokes of water texture just to express the water even further. Just make sure that if you do this part that the water lines don't go into those front cattails, because those aren't supposed to be in the water. They're supposed to be like hovering over the water. So I'm done with the paint. So now I'm going to clean off the brush and put the brush away. And with a number 2 pencil, I decided to darken the eye a little bit just so it shows up a little bit more. Now this next part is completely optional, but it is completely fun. I've got this product called Stickles to add a little bit of sparkle to my picture. And so you just lightly squeeze it, and I'm going to add like little highlights on each cattail. And my camera actually doesn't even do these sparkles justice, but even on camera you can see how sparkly it is. It's so pretty. And here I decided to put just little sparkly dots all around my cattails, just to make it look a little extra magical. And right about here, I didn't even notice that my hand squished into the white paint there. So I would recommend that you clean up your paint first. But I was having so much fun with these sparkles that I didn't even notice. But anyway, you'll notice that on the left side of the paper, I put the highlights on the right sides of the cattails because that's what's facing the moon. And then on the other side, I put the highlights on the left side because, again, that's what's facing the moon. And here's where I finally noticed what a mess I was making with that paint. I was so lucky that that did not ruin my picture. So again, always make sure that you clean up after yourself. So there's another free tip for you. But anyway, look at that. We're finished. Isn't that so beautiful? I really hope you had fun as much as I did, and hopefully I will see you again for another lesson. Thanks so much. Bye.